How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Snap Judgments. I have Steve here. He is from Draft Professors and from some others. I know you from Draft Professors. Why don't you give yourself an intro to folks and tell them where they can find your stuff, what you do, maybe how you got into this real quick, and we'll go from
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. So first, appreciate you having me. Love being on here. Love the show. Subscribe to him on YouTube, guys. I'm sure he'll give you that plug, but Randy does some great stuff. But again, thanks for having me. Yep. We knew each other from the Draft Professors. I podcast there on Thursday nights. But the center of the universe, everything is right here. Mainly Twitter, run some Twitter spaces on the weekend mornings. A lot of NFL, a lot of college, a lot of stuff, I suppose. Finally relaunching my Substack this weekend. A little bit of imposter syndrome, kept doing articles and then do I want to go live? But now as we're in the home stretch to the draft, finally relaunching that. And then my own YouTube channel, and everything is at Steve_NFL. But yeah, again, thanks for having me. Looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, go definitely go check out the Twitter Spaces. I'm kind of a Twitter rookie. I'm not a big. I've never been a big Twitter guy. I try to post there now, but I'm still not super consistent with it. But I've dropped in a couple of your spaces there, and I didn't even know they had that option. It's like a little live radio. You can have it just playing on your browser while you're doing things. It's really nifty, and he's got a lot of guys that just kind of jump in and out of the conversation. So you're getting a lot of different perspectives there. It's really nifty.
Yep. But in terms of how I got into it, the whole thing, as well as the X or Twitter, pick your poison thing, is I am unabashedly a fan of the New York Jets. And when you're a fan of the New York Jets, two things happen. Number one, you learn to love the NFL because you're just miserable all the time. Number two, and I'm being sarcastic here, but you start doing your mock drafts as soon as the draft is over, right? So that's really what got me down the college road into the whole scouting thing and all the draft stuff. And, it becomes all encompassing where, it takes over your life, but, it's something you enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm jealous of you, frankly. You have had now this upcoming draft and the next draft, you'll have 5 draft picks, first round. And this is the second time in 5 years that's happened. So as a draft nerd, you have the ideal team. Okay. From that perspective.
Well, we'll see how that plays out, because those who don't learn from history are forced to repeat it, right? So you brought up a great point. The prior general manager, Joe Douglas, he had the number 2 pick in 2021, which turned into Zach Wilson. They had made a trade sending Jamal Adams to safety to Seattle, and he wound up with 2 ones for that. But anyway, long story short, most of those guys are now gone, with the exception of Garrett Wilson. And we could get into one of the guys who yesterday signed with the New England Patriots. And, we'll cover that as we go forward. Yep.
Yeah, we'll definitely be touching on that in a moment here. Look, we're getting into the free agency tampering period, all right, and it's this time of year that the news cycle feels like you're drinking from their fire hose. Okay, it's a lot. The first hour or two, it's just. I mean, I got carpal tunnel in my finger from hitting refresh on Adam Schefter's Twitter. Okay, it's all kinds of news coming out. Mock drafts from a week ago, I mean, they're already outdated. Mock drafts from 2 days ago are already outdated. Free agency, it reshapes draft priorities every year. After the first, we've been 24, 31 hours into the tampering period. What's the biggest way that the draft landscape changed in your mind, Steve?
Well, and I think that's the thing with the mock drafts, right? I mean, free agency and trades and things leading up into the draft will always change the landscape. So the mocks are really just, an exercise for, draft guys like us. But they're more of a form of video gaming, right? It's entertainment because we never know which way a team will go. But it's a great question because let's even go back, and I'll kick it off with before the legal tampering began. I think one of the bigger moves certainly was when the Rams traded for Trent McDuffie from the Chiefs,
Mm,
right? I guess that was last week. The way things go now, it seems like a month ago already,
yeah,
but it was
yeah,
a pretty big move because obviously the Rams have 2 1s, like a bunch of other teams. They're sitting there in the top half. With Atlanta's pick. I believe it's which one is that? 13 maybe, if I remember correctly. And then they're sitting towards the tail end based of their own. And I think, if you looked at, certain things or the way, we were talking, we just kind of figured they'd probably go corner early,
mhm,
maybe a Mansour Delane or, depending on Jermod McCoy, how his health, has been checking out. And then a lot of people thought, well, Matt Stafford isn't getting any younger rather. Maybe that would be a spot for a Ty Simpson. And well, boom, that late pick
yeah,
is now gone, right? They took a corner,
yeah,
went ahead and got another corner.
yeah,
So can't foresee them going quarterback whatsoever at pick 13. I think now that's one landscape that switches to one of the other needs that haven't seen them really address. I mean, it was really the corners that were the moves. And of course, they re signed their own safety, Cam Curl, to a nice
yeah.
deal. But I think now we're looking at the O line potentially.
Well, yeah, I think this, to me is a little bit of a signifier of the concern they have at right tackle after Rob Habenstein retired. Now they have a backup there. His name is not at the tip of my tongue for whatever reasons, but I know that they felt good about him. Warren McClendon Jr., who had looked good at times, and I had heard that maybe they felt good about him. But then you go all in on the cornerback position, and that's really the only other screaming need on your roster. So it wouldn't surprise me to see them address that situation there. Now, what move surprised you the most on day one of the free tampering season period?
Yeah, and we spoke about this a little backstage. It's interesting. I don't know that there was anything that just made me, pull like a cartoon move going, blah, 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 what? I think as with every year, the money sort of surprises me. And I try and remember in the back of my mind, obviously the cap is going up and we really don't know for a while how these deals really are structured. We just see them at face value. We don't know, what the payout is and the void years and everything. Yeah, I think the couple of things that stood out to me, I'll use the word surprise, is just how active certain teams were and how inactive so far other teams have been. There are teams
Mm,
with a lot of money, right? Like the Tennessee Titans, the Las Vegas Raiders. They've certainly been doing the whole, money, 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 right? Even my New
yeah.
York Jets, I didn't think they'd be as active as quickly as they have been. But, I look at some of these deals, it's more so the numbers. So Jalen Phillips leaving the Eagles and going to the Panthers. I think the one that really blew me away, and we'll see how it plays out, is the Washington Commanders uh, giving Odafe Owe $100 million, 68 of it guaranteed. So those are the ones that sort of, raise the antenna on my head. What about you? What did you find surprising or shocking or
I mean, the one that really hit me had to be Tyler Linderbaum. He completely reset the center market, going 150% above the previous max value center, which was Creed Humphrey. That's a shocking number for a center. I mean, it really is going to drive the entire interior offensive line market through the roof. And look, I understand he's 25 years old. I understand he's a very talented center, but I also was surprised with it from a team building standpoint because I felt like the Raiders were in a similar position on the offensive line, at least on the interior, as the Patriots were, where we had Jared Wilson playing out of position, move him over to center, and then you fill the guard spot. That's what I was looking for out of the Raiders too. I thought, you used a pretty high draft asset on JPJ a few years ago. He's a talented prospect out of Oregon. You just slide him over to center and you get yourself a guard and you fill your offensive line needs in a much cheaper way than 27 million a year to a center, which is that was a pretty eyebrow raising contract to me. Um, so I think, when we get into kind of what happened with the free agency in the AFC East, um, I thought it was interesting that Miami, look, we kind of started the day with Miami looking like they were going to sell out, right? Like it looked like it was a fire sale. They shipped Minka Fitzpatrick up to you guys for a bag of peanuts. They were cutting Tua and going to absorb 90 something million in dead cap. And then they turned around and they brought in what was the top free agent on the market at the quarterback position in Malik Willis. And we really have, a South Beach version of the Packers here. Where do you think Miami's headed?
Yeah, so great summary of it. And I think most of us thought that, Malik Willis would probably either wind up in Miami, although it certainly seemed like they were doing more of a money dump than looking, to draw in, right? Us Jet fans like to go by, the word tank, right? And you look at the Cardinals, you look at the Dolphins, you look at the Jets, potentially as three of the worst teams that we could see in the 2026 season. So I think, we looked at the Dolphins, with the connections of, John Eric Sullivan going there and Jeff Hafley. John Robinson got hired in their front office, who was the Titans GM who drafted him. And you look at the Cardinals because you had Baby LaFleur now, the head coach. His brother was Malik's, previous Monty Ossenfort, the Cardinals GM, was part of that Titans staff when Malik was drafted. And then he brings in, as I'll use the term loosely, offensive coordinator, Nate Hackett, who was with, obviously Malik this past season in Green Bay. So it wasn't a shock. You look at the roster, right? So they had Tua. Obviously, that bridge had been burned, and not the GM that brought him in. New coach, the whole thing. And I don't know. My feeling is, how much will it change? Right. I mean, they still got Ewers, obviously. Zach Wilson, I don't expect back. He may be in the UFL. But let's think about it, Rand. What we saw of him in Tennessee didn't exactly light it up because he was available to Green Bay for basically a steak dinner. Right. And we saw some good things in the limited time he played in Green Bay, but it's a big gamble, I think, on their part. So
yeah,
we'll see how it plays
again. I think. Well, I think I just would have. I would have been much more open to Miami just fully hitting the reset button, kind of eating their vegetables this year, if you will, and then chasing their quarterback next year in the draft. I was really surprised by this move overall.
Yeah, I do understand that. But, getting back to what I was saying a minute ago, look, do I think they're going to be in the market for, Ty Simpson or, wherever you want to go from there? I don't think so. I don't know how the contract is structured. Does it take them out of sniffing around a day 3 guy and pick your poison? I have no idea how the board's going to, wind up rolling out, your Cole Paytons, your Garrett Nussmeyers, your Cade Klubnik, your Drew Aller, the list goes on and on and on, right? Sawyer Robertson, Diego Pavia, throwing these names in there too.
Carson Beck.
Carson Beck, right?
Low
Local,
moving cost
you
there,
know.
right?
Yeah, yeah. I shouldn't forget about you, Carson. I shouldn't. I'm sorry, but I do think it takes them out of, let's just say, not that it would have happened, but Ty Simpson early in the first round, right? And I think Miami's got the other things they need to address, right? You look at the secondary, edge, another receiver, right tackle, right guard. There's plenty of ways they can go. So yeah, but I still think that they'll be sniffing around that day three quarterback thing.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that's going to certainly depend on how the new coaching staff feels about Quinn Ewers and whether or not he's a serviceable backup. If God forbid you need him. I do think, obviously the secondary got worse that morning, as I mentioned, with Minka Fitzpatrick being shipped up to New York. Let's go over and touch on some of the New York Jets additions here, because not only did they get Minka Fitzpatrick, and I know, look, he's been a little bit of a locker room issue at his past two stops. I heard him referred to as a locker room lawyer, quote unquote. I'm not entirely sure what that even means, to be honest. But I wonder if this is the kind of team that can absorb a locker room problem like that. They've already got Malachi Moore at the safety position in that room, and he was a little bit of a head case at times in college. And it's a young room overall. What do you think about the Minka Fitzpatrick trade specifically?
Yeah, you know, when we look at, and we'll could talk a little more about all the different signings that they've done over the last 30 hours or whatever. But, the Jets were amazing in many ways last season. They didn't have a single interception,
Yeah,
not a single one in 17 games. And this was another, I mean, the defense overall got a lot worse from the Sala and, the Ulbrich days, but they can't stop the run. So some of the moves, and, years ago had a Twitter space where former player Damian Woody was on, and he was talking about the glory days, 09, 10, the Rex Ryan days. And I was not the biggest
mhm,
Rex Ryan fan, but besides that, but he said, coaches coach, right? And you need that locker room to be vocal, to be filled with leaders. Well, not for nothing. There are no dogs, no leaders, no this or that in that locker room. Okay.
yeah,
Quinn and Williams wanted out. They facilitated that. Sauce Gardner, he had his weird moments too. Goodbye. Garrett Wilson is a leader, but he's just not a vocal leader. And
mm,
God only knows how long he wants to stay and deal with this. Um, but the Minka thing, I always felt that they would probably buy one and draft one.
mm,
I didn't necessarily think it would be Minka, in terms of a trade. I thought, they would kick the tires on, some of the other names. I didn't think they'd land Cam Curl, and then his name came off pretty quickly, but, a Cook or something like that, or maybe even a Brisker, and, they would still draft, a safety early because they had one of the worst, if not the worst, safety room in the NFL in
yeah,
2025. Um, so, yeah, I mean, the number they gave him, 3 for 40. We'll see the breakdown. I mean, it's the exact same number that Kobe Bryant got from the Bears. And it's actually a little bit more than what Cam Curl got. So, we'll see. But he's not what he was 5, 6 years ago, but I still think he's going to be a capable player. The Jets' new defensive coordinator, also in quotes, was in Miami with him last year. Duger, whatever his name is. So,
Duker, yeah.
Duker, thank you. But yeah, we'll see how that plays out. But overall, I didn't have a problem with it. I thought it was interesting. They didn't give up a lot to get him. But, if we stay on topic with the other signings they did, the money doesn't exactly seem prohibitive. I even took a look at the deal that they gave Joseph Asai, and it's basically he's got an easy out after
Mm,
2027. You know,
okay.
on Yamada 1 year deal. I can't pronounce Kingsley's last name. I'm not even going to try. 1 year
Enigbare.
deal.
Enigbare,
Thank
yeah.
you. Thank you. Enigbare.
Yep.
Demario Davis. Now that was an interesting one, right? I mean, I'm getting up there in age. He and I may have
Yeah.
been, in high school together. 2 years, 22 million with 15 guaranteed.
Well, what's
Look, the
funny?
guy.
What's
Yeah,
funny
go
is
ahead.
that he is actually older. He's actually older than your new defensive coordinator, Brian Duker.
He is. Yeah. I mean, you can't argue with
That I
the
was
with the
entertained
locker
by.
room presence. It's funny. Yeah, it is funny.
Yeah.
Um, but you can't argue with what he brings to a locker room. He's a good man. Here's a alarming stat. When he's been asked to cover, a tight end or a running back in a receiving role, he was targeted 48 times and he gave up 45 completions.
Oh, that's
It's, that's not great.
not a trend you want to continue. No, no.
No. But where I think he's going to be is, look, however, whatever they do it to, most of the debate has been Bailey, Bain, Reese. I sort of pretty much think it's going to be Reese. Well, that's who
Mhm.
he's going to be next to if they are indeed switching to, more of an odd front alignment away from what Glenn has done in the past. So, bring that leadership, not only for an Arvell Reese, but maybe can jolt something back for Jamie and Sherwood, because I think the scheme, as well as not having CJ Mosley around, even in the locker room, was a big deal.
And do you think that this free agency set them up to better be able to to carry out their draft plan at pick number uh was it 2 and 16? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think anything will change with two. I still think
Mm.
it's going to be most likely Bailey or Reese. I don't, I mean, it could be Bain, great player. But yeah, I don't see them going the Sonny Styles route. I don't see them going, Carnell Tate or Jeremiah Love or, pick your poison, in terms of that. Now, I don't think it changes
Yeah.
their plans for two. I do think though that I still do think safety is a need, but now instead of say round two, because they don't have any round three, they gave that 2 years ago to the Eagles for Hassan Reddick. That was great.
Mm.
I think maybe that's a early day three situation now. Look at guys depending how the board falls. I love Bud Clark, Zakee
Yeah.
Wheatley, Jalen Husky of Maryland. I think these could be good fits, or he may go. You may be able to do something in a trade down in the second round, because they do have the 2 second-round picks. I think Jalen Kilgore would be a great fit in that defense, because Glenn loves those hybrid guys. But I think the signs are pointing, though, to your question, that it's going to be more offensive. And I don't mean that as an adjective. The Jets as a whole are offensive, but I do think, that that's where it's going to lean. But, in my Twitter spaces, one of the names that we've been talking about for a few weeks, depending how the board falls, even though they've invested year in, year out, it seems, on O-line in the first round, I think, Penn State's Olavega Ioane could be the guy
Yes.
at 16. And he may, number one, be the best player available there, but it's a pretty bad need now. Okay. I
Yeah.
didn't think they were going to bring back Simpson. I didn't think they were going to bring back Elijah Vera Tucker, but that is a gaping hole right now. The left guard position, you're getting guys signed left and right, traded, signed, all over the place. And this was a strength, right? I don't think Josh Myers is a center. You could draft a guy day three, develop him. But I think, but overall, yeah, I definitely think we're looking more towards the offensive side of the ball.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And I mean, that transitions us well into the next team. which is my Patriots. Look, they had, along with the Bills, we kind of included them in this little section together at first because they were both so quiet at the beginning of free agency. The Patriots had added Draymond Jones right off the bat, but then we didn't hear anything else about them until later last night when Elijah Vera Tucker news came in, and then Romeo Dobbs this morning at something like 17 million a year. Elijah Vera Tucker something like 14, and Draymond Jones is he's roughly about the same 13, 14 million a year. So a couple of very solid players, no stars or no number one receiver, but I do feel like they've filled out this thing to the point where it looks to me like they're going to just go BPA at 31, where it's you've got serviceable starters across the offensive line, pretty much at every position that you need them at, and it puts you in a situation where you can really just take best player available according to your board. I'm interested to see what happens with Hawkins and Chason. I personally think that they let them test the market. Those guys didn't find what they wanted, and I wouldn't be
Yeah,
surprised to see them come back on
I
on
agree.
relatively friendly deals.
Yep, I agree. But yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think it was very easy to, start picking on Will Campbell based on, how things look coming back from the MCL. And, he looked pretty good the first part of the season before the injury. We can argue the arm length thing and all that, but the bottom line is he did look pretty good, but the minute they sent, Bradbury off, the picture started getting painted, right? Because you slide, your guy from guard right
Yeah.
into, Jared Wilson into the center position. And then the question was, ooh, do they go left tackle now at 31 and they're going to move Campbell? Well, AVT pretty much answered that question. I had no doubt there'd be a good market for him. The only thing is, you just hope the guy can stay healthy. My prediction is now that he's gone for the Jets, he will never miss another game in his life. That is my prediction. But
You
yeah,
just have that kind of luck down there, huh?
oh, we sure do. Yeah, same old Jets. Yep. But I definitely think BPA is certainly the way you can go. I like Dobbs. I really do. I always did, and not because he always had the funny looking Megamind helmet on. But I think, I think he'll be a great fit, for what Josh McDaniel wants to do. I think, he'll be reliable for Drake May. I just don't think you're out of the receiver market yet. I don't think so.
Yeah.
So yeah,
No, I tend to agree with you there. Look, I clearly Philly is slow playing the AJ Brown situation, and that's understandable because it's a $30 million deal. Okay. That's when if they wait until past June 1st, they save $30 million in dead cap. So that's very simple. My understanding is what they're asking for now is a 2026 second and a 2027 first. That's not reasonable for the Patriots to pay, certainly. If they were going to give a first, I would say the 2026. Fine. I wouldn't love it, but fine. You can't give a 2027 first for AJ Brown right now, I don't think. Now the
yeah. And
Bills,
look, not that I want to see you guys improve, and I don't know how the board will fall, but if my choice is giving up a one and a two or a two and a one, and I have a shot of grabbing, let's say Denzel Boston, let's say he's there at 31, well, I'd rather do that and I get him cheap for 4 to 5 years. Why would I do that? I don't know.
yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think that they're, trying to play on Mike Vrabel's loyalty and friendship to AJ Brown and so forth. And because Mike Vrabel is a guy like that, right? Like he's a loyal guy. He'll bring his friends on. Todd Downing is the shining example of it, right? Fired under Mike Vrabel at Tennessee, kind of because he was forced to due to the DUI issues. And one of the, he brought him right in over here. Didn't matter that he'd never coached wide receivers before. He was like, hey, listen, I got a spot for you. Okay. So he's that guy. He's all about loyalty. That's how he does business. That's how he operates. Um, I also had heard speculation from somebody that the on-camera reaction from Mike Vrabel when AJ Brown got traded for Tennessee was
I'll
a
never
little
forget
bit.
that.
Well, yeah, but this person had said, God, I wish I remember who it was. I feel like I want to say it was Diana Rossini, but they had essentially said that uh, there was a little bit of acting involved there, that he knew about the trade, and that a lot of that was for the cameras. And I could see
Oh,
that,
really?
honestly. That's kind
Okay.
of what she intimated. Yeah. I mean, she didn't outright say it, but she was like, yeah, the whole camera reaction, like he knew about it beforehand. So,
Hmm.
you know, like, so
Interesting.
I don't know. I don't know if he was playing for the cameras. I don't know any of that. Look, AJ Brown has concerns with his knees. That was part of the reason that they wanted to ship him out of Tennessee. He's been good sense, but do you want to roll the dice on that a few years later? I don't know. But when we shift over to the Bills' perspective on this, they did get themselves a receiver. They went out and traded a second round pick for DJ Moore. A lot of people felt like that was a little bit too much. Then they went ahead and re-signed Connor McGovern. That was 13 million a year that they're paying him, less than half what Vegas is paying Tyler Linderbaum, for those keeping track at home. And other than that, they've been fairly quiet. They did lose starting guard David Edwards, which was, you saw that coming. They were going to have to pick McGovern or Edwards pretty much. Once they resigned McGovern, Edwards was on his way out the door. He went to New Orleans 4 for 61. What do you think about where the Bills stand in the hierarchy of this division right now? Do you think they did enough over the course of this offseason so far to maintain a place, or maybe retake their place atop the AFC East?
Well, look, while Josh Allen is healthy, and I think you can't ever count them out. Obviously, New England had great success in 2025, and a lot of it was earned. A lot of it, you could be the detractor and say it was schedule related, but and they won't get that again, obviously, in 2026. But look, obviously, it starts at the top, right? Brandon Bean kept his job, but Sean McDermott is no longer there. And now you've got Brady running the show with Jim Leonard. So, can Brady effectively, move into that? How is Leonard going to be, running an NFL defense all on his own? Stay tuned. It's a soap opera cliffhanger. But yeah, I mean, you got James Cook, you got Josh Allen. You know, eh, you kind of feel that they still have the edge, but um, obviously the gap closed quite a bit,
Yeah.
and I think your Patriots are going to keep nipping at the heels, and I don't think they're done. I think they still could consider a receiver, in the first round. Epinesa is a free agent. I don't expect them to bring back Bosa. What are you doing at the edge? Matt Milano is now gone. What are you doing with the safety position? Because the only thing I think they've done right now with the secondary is at the nickel. D Alford, they gave him 3 years
Yes. Yep.
for about 7 or 8 a year, give or take. So as with all the teams, everybody's got work to do, and the draft could be a home run, the draft could be a crapshoot, as we all know, and just wait and see. But you and I being fans of other AFC East teams, neither of us are going to shed a tear if they're not the top dog anymore.
Yeah, no, certainly not. I think honestly, the most surprising thing about Buffalo to me is who's still on the team. And that's Keon Coleman. I'm surprised they didn't try to get any capital out of that. I mean, it's just not too often that you have an owner come out to a press stand, publicly take a dump on an active player, and that he's still on the team. And then the offensive coordinator gets hired to the head coach and calls this guy and says, me being hired as the head coach is the best thing that could happen to you, as if he wasn't his offensive coordinator for the last 2 years. So I just can't figure it out. I almost feel the same way with Buffalo that I feel about Miami. I have more hope for Buffalo because they have a quarterback, but I just don't know what direction they're going in. It's sometimes it seems like this way, sometimes it seems like that way, and I just can't figure it out right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Time will tell. But yeah, I think, I have a feeling come April 25th, 6th, whatever, that Keon Coleman very likely will be, on another roster or, maybe a little later, and he won't be on any roster. Somebody's going to take a shot, right? It's an ego
Yeah.
game. Somebody's going to say, I could fix this guy, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's Andy
Yeah.
Reid, right? I can't see the Bills sending a receiver to Kansas City, just hypothetically speaking. Maybe Sean McVay, another one. I could fix this guy. I don't know. Pick your poison out of 31 other teams. But yeah. But again, if they're on the downside, I'm not going to mind because I'm still going to be a bottom dweller for a couple of years.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's a natural human thing. You see the traits you like, big, tall, can go up and get the ball, he can catch him. And you think it's like dating, right? You see someone with the traits you like, doesn't matter what their ex says about him, you think, oh, I could fix that. And that somebody's gonna think that, to your point. As we pop out around the league, look, there are a number of deals that potentially changed the way that we see mock drafts over the next month or so. Starting off with you mentioned earlier the Owe deal to Washington. Um, Edge seems like a less urgent need in Washington now. I had been projecting Arvell Reese if he sank to them, or David Bailey. Where do you think Washington goes at 7 now?
Well, there's one other piece I was thinking about. Who would you say is one of the biggest free agents we haven't heard anything yet about at the edge position?
Trey Hendrickson. Hendrickson.
Bingo,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Washington still has a lot of money, and deals are happening. You haven't heard a peep. If I'm Adam Peters and you got a defensive coach and Dan Quinn, I'd be making that call. I mean, can you imagine if Trey Hendrickson's on one side and you have Owe on the other? Then I would definitely feel that edge is no longer a priority.
Yeah.
But at 7, I don't know. Maybe, you think they start sniffing around Jeremiah Love or Caleb Downs. I still think edge is a priority, but yeah, it could definitely change it.
I think that if Jeremiah Love is still on the board at 7, he could be an option. I think that, what happened, and they're not on this graphic here, but the way the New Orleans Saints and the way the Kansas City Chiefs attacked the running back position in the free agency market says to me that they don't think Jeremiah Love is going to be on the board there, because Jeremiah Love on a rookie contract is a better deal than Etienne at 54 million, or uh Murray at or yeah,
Kenneth Walker. Yeah.
Walker, not Murray. Walker with the Chiefs. He was about 13 million a year, something like that too, I think.
Yeah.
I think Jeremiah Love's a better option than either of those guys. I don't think these guys think he's going to be there at 8. Washington, that's what I had a guy balling in Burgundy on this week from the Commanders, a Commanders podcast guy. And that's what he talked about, how Jeremiah Love could fit into that Washington offense.
Yeah. And I think that's a good call. I mean, there was some scratching and sniffing. Would the Cardinals consider that at 3? And I didn't think so. I still, and especially now, feel tackle is much more likely. But yeah, that's another team. They went out, they get Tyler Algier. A few days earlier, they re-up James Conner. We don't know Benson and his health, but yeah, you can't see them going Love. I guess Tennessee is the interesting one, right? I see them,
Yes.
on your list here at number 4,
Yes.
at pick number 4. I mean, Wandale Robinson, good player. Uh, it's just, it's such a weird draft, when you look at the star power. I mean, if there wasn't questions about Jordan Tyson's medicals, it'd be like, all right, yeah, this dude's going to be a top 5 pick. And I don't think he
Right.
will be. So I don't know. I mean, Calvin Ridley is still around. And I mean, Brian Dayball, yeah, maybe Love could be there. Or, does Salah, go to Borgonzi and say, nope, I need Ruben Bain or, or something. I
Yeah.
don't know. Um, so I don't think that it's a complete pivot to O line for sure. Um, but DL, I think, is still in question. And I still think Jeremiah Love could be the maybe there.
Yeah, I mean that's sure one way to help out a young quarterback. If you're not positioned, if you're not in love with one of the wide receivers, or you feel like the wide receiver group is pretty deep and you could come back around at the top of the second round and grab one there, do you take the blue chip prospect at the running back position? That's certainly an interesting conversation to be had for them. Right there in the middle too, we've got San Francisco with Mike Evans. Look, a lot of people have had San Francisco taking wide receiver there, whether it's Casey Concepcion, whether it's Omar Cooper Jr. out of Indiana. Um, those are different types of receivers than Mike Evans. So I wonder, does the Mike Evans signing change that for you, or do you think that they're still likely to bring in a guy like Casey Concepcion or maybe Omar Cooper Jr. if they're available when they pick late in the first?
I don't. I think it totally changes it in my view. Look, he's getting older. He's dealt with a lot of injuries. So, the joke about the electrical substation now comes into play, the conspiracy theory. Uh, but I do think it will change it. And I mean, what's going on with the tackle, right? I really think that may be a spot. If Caleb Lomu, goes that down, or I'm trying to think, Blake Miller might be a
Mhm.
spot. But yeah, I definitely think the Mike Evans signing changes the early wide receiver conversation.
Yeah, Max Ihenekor is another one there.
Ryan Acor. Yep.
I have been questionable about him because I wasn't sure about his age. I'm hearing now that he's 22 and change,
Right.
going to be
Yep.
23 in October. So that's
Right.
what I've heard recently. That's what I'm going with right now because it's not wild outside the timeline. It had been reported earlier that he was 21, and I was like, no, that's crazy. He's not 21 and a redshirt senior who got here from Nigeria, graduated a medical magnet school in high school at 15 and a half. And
Right.
then as the new Doogie Howser was like, you know what? Screw it. I'll try JUCO and play tackle. Like that was
Yeah.
ridiculous to me. The idea that he's about 23, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
He's another
I
option there
agree
at the
with
end.
you.
I I think it's interesting with the
Yeah.
49ers because it's like the whole electrical base thing, right? That whole how is it like everywhere I listen, you come into contact with some shit like that, you become a superhero human. You become a
Oh, yeah.
superhero. Okay, so maybe that's what's happening. Okay. Trent Williams and CMC are taking the power from the substation, but it's killing everybody else. Okay. That's
It's
why Trent
killing all the
Williams is
defensive
playing.
players. Yeah.
Yes, yes. That's why Trent Williams is playing at the ripe old age of 83 or whatever he is now. And CMC has managed to keep that porcelain body in one piece for the past couple of years.
Yep.
Um, so last on the list is the Colts. And the Colts are another one where it's interesting to see where they're going and what they're doing and what their thoughts are. They've got Daniel Jones there on the transition tag. He wants 50 million a year. Good luck with that. They brought back Pierce, so between the two of them, it's going to be about 80 million a year if they want to keep
Yeah.
him happy. Look, the Pierce extension, obviously the Patriots were in on that market. Alex Pierce, once in his life since high school, has gone over 1,000 yards. That includes the 4 years at college at Cincinnati, where he did have a good quarterback in Desmond Ritter. Um, but once in his life has gone over 1,000 yards, and that was 1,003 yards last year. Um, in college, his high in catches was like 57, I think it was.
Right.
He's never really been a heavy workload number one receiver. And the quarterback reasoning notwithstanding in the NFL, again, that dates back to college when he had a good quarterback. So it's just not something he's done. They're paying him nearly $30 million a year. And I would say they don't have their quarterback question for next year and beyond answered. Um, how do you feel about Pierce's signing? And do you think that the Colts are locked into defense now?
Yeah. So buyer beware on these things. You hit every point spot on about his production and whatnot. And I was surprised that he stayed there. I really thought he'd end up either in San Francisco or in Tennessee. Um, but even though he stayed, Pittman is gone now, right? So you're paying
Yeah.
him to be the number one guy, and by subtraction, you certainly are the number one guy. And we'll see how it
Yeah.
goes. He said he wanted quarterback stability. Well, I mean, Daniel Jones popped the Achilles in what, November, December? I mean, maybe he goes out to San Francisco and rubs his ankle along the substation. Regenerates like the Spider-Man
Yep.
villain, the lizard. But anyway, all jokes aside, yeah, I'm not sure that there isn't going to be a whole buyer, beware thing. I mean, they
Yeah.
gave up 2 first-round picks for Sauce Gardner. So talk about questionable management. Anyway,
Yeah.
putting all the,
Yeah.
all the poking aside, yeah, I actually always felt defense was going to be in play for them early. I think they really got to look at, what's going on the D line. They could use some linebacker help. So, yeah, for me, it's been defense, and I would expect it to be, maybe that's a spot for in the second round. Well, yeah, because we have their first. Let's see. I don't really think Lee Hunter is going to drop that far into the second round.
No.
Maybe a Dante Corleone, or maybe, if not on the D line, I mean, we really like this linebacker class, right? And
Yes.
maybe Anthony Hill is there, or um, uh, give me some other names. Jacob
But
Rodriguez.
a
I mean, I could start.
How about a Daryl Jackson Jr. on the defensive line?
There
Is
you
that too
go.
early for him
Yep.
the second
Yep.
round?
I don't pay him enough respect as I should. Absolutely. Yeah. That could be a great landing spot for him right there.
That would be
Um,
an interesting spot. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. The only thing is, and we'll see. Anarumo, he's a good defensive coordinator, but you and I know a lot of Cincy people that weren't exactly sad to see him go, because he tends to like to not rotate in the young guys. But even so, I don't know what their cap situation is. I haven't looked at it, but yeah, I'm still expecting them to go somewhere, within that front seven.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense to me. It's you know, you've almost got to go with the defense for certain. And with the way that this class is going to fall out, look, it's deep in edge rushers. I think it's fairly deep along the defensive line as a whole. And then, like you said, the linebacker position, that front seven, there's a lot of good options there. And then as for wanting quarterback stability, look, at this time last year, Miles Garrett wanted to win. And then it turned out he just
That's
wanted
true.
$40 million a year. And that's kind
Yep.
of how that works out a lot of the times, right?
Yeah.
Um, so looking at the draft specifically, is there anything that this free agency period told you about the position groups in the draft, or perhaps just the NFL's perception of the position groups in the draft?
Yeah, great question. I mean, every draft is specific. We know last year, the defensive tackle, you had guys flying off the boards. There are guys in this draft. It's just and it is deep. I don't think you just have that, star power. Um, the one position that comes to mind at first, and this was even before, Monday, the legal tampering, we saw, I mentioned it before with Bradbury uh, being put on the move. We saw some other signings. I think what we've seen go on, even taking Linderbaum out of the equation, because that was just obscene, um, is that how potentially these front offices are viewing the center position in this draft, right? I mean, in my way of thinking, I don't know your board. We haven't, spoken about it, but I don't see any guys really before, the second half of day two, meaning round three. And there were some guys I really like and some guys that I don't like as much. But we're in a draft where a couple of the better center prospects may be coming over from the tackle position. Brian Parker, depends, I
Hmm.
know our friend Bill Sparks, is really high on Spencer Fano moving to the center position, Trey Zune.
Yeah.
I think what we've seen go on, with the legal tampering and the re-signings, the trades, tells you pretty much what the league is thinking, that they're not in love with the center position, at least not as a plug and play, more as a developmental thing. What do you think?
I mean, I do think that maybe there are I think there are some guys at the center position. I wonder like maybe they got good reviews on Connor Lew's medicals at the combine. I do think Jake Slaughter is a guy who can step in and start tomorrow on an NFL offensive line at center. And I think that the center position is important. I've had I intend to have a full perhaps series dedicated to positional value at some point in time in the summer here. And I think the center is one of the more underrated positions on the line. So I think it's incredibly important to fill it with a good player. But I think you're right. Like we've seen certainly some value in that. We saw it actually right before we got on here. Elton Jenkins, that the Packers had cut, signed with the Browns. So they've got actually a fairly strong start to an offensive line over there from what I've seen.
Yeah. Yeah, they
Because
traded
Titus
for
Howard,
Titus Howard, right? And
yep, Elton
who did
Jenkins, and then
they
they signed a guard,
uh,
Zion Williamson or Zion
yeah,
Johnson.
Johnson from the Chargers. Yeah, and
Yes.
I thought they made another move, but I could be wrong. But hang on, let me
No,
check
I
because
think they
now
did
I'm
too. I
real.
think they signed another right
Yeah,
tackle.
that is correct. Who did they bring in? Titus Howard, Elton Jenkins. Okay. Oh, they held on to Tevin Jenkins at the guard spot. They held on to him,
Yep.
but that's all I know as of right now. But here's the thing, to the point I made though, at the same time, these guys are going to get drafted, right? You're going to see the Slaughters.
Yep.
Lou is going to go, Pat Coogan, Trey Zune, I mentioned before. And, it's not like these guys are going to be priority or undrafted free agents. But I think, the developmental part is big because what's the one position everybody's expecting to be huge next year? The quarterback position. And I don't want
Mhm.
a rookie quarterback with a rookie center. I want some guy who's got some gristle on that meat, you know? So get him in. Maybe, even the Jets are a good example. I mean, Josh Myers, go get a guy on day three. Maybe it is a Zune or, whoever will fit, this guy's scheme and, whether he's around or not next year. Because if you're going to go and get Arch Manning, C.J. Carr, Dante Moore, Darian Mensah, the list goes on and on. I want somebody with experience putting that ball in your hands.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense to me. And when it comes to how it affects the draft, um, I'm not going to break my arm patting myself on the back, but I had Monroe Freeling to the Browns at 6 a couple weeks ago in my mock draft before it was a cool thing to do. Okay. Um, but you look at their offensive line movement, Titus Howard on the right side, uh, Zion Johnson, guard, Tevin, what was his name? Tevin
Yeah.
Jenkins,
Yep.
guard, Elton Jenkins, center.
Center.
What's the one position they have not filled? Left
The
tackle.
most important one. Yep.
Yes.
Left
And that
tackle.
is the position that we project Monroe Freeling to. He's the only player in the draft at the tackle position that I haven't heard anybody say, well, maybe he'll have to switch to guard. So I still like him very much at 6 overall to the Cleveland Browns. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. I think, You look at the other tackle possibility. I mean, the Giants need some help along the right side. I don't really think they would go that way. And then they, re-signed Illuminor. So you look at the Cardinals at 3, they've got a left tackle. I think, Mauanoa makes a lot of sense for them at 3 to play the right tackle spot. I do like him at the tackle position versus guard. So I think that's a fit. But yeah, I'm 110% with you. Monroe Freeling will more than likely be a Cleveland Brown somewhere around 8:45 p.m. in about 5 or 6 weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think the other thing that I noticed with free agency is there's just not a lot of big contracts being signed by cornerbacks right now. When you consider the top of the market's about 30 million, and the best contract that was signed in this, or that was agreed to so far, hasn't been signed, is Alontae Taylor at just short of 20 million a year, which is a terrible, terrible contract. I heard a guy on a podcast say today, okay, Jeremy Green on the Sportsocracy, good podcast. Check it out if you have time someday. They go live every day. Great podcast. One of my favorite guys, a good friend of mine. And he was like, if they made a special rule in the NFL that only Alontae Taylor could carry a bat and he was allowed to whack wide receivers with it whenever he wanted, he still wouldn't be worth $20 million a year. Like, okay, that's
Yeah,
pretty
I mean they're
definitive.
right. But yeah, that was a question
But look,
at that number, and then
yeah,
before
it's an
you and I,
underwhelming cornerback class.
yeah, yeah. I mean the other move, we saw the Eagles grabbed Woolen just before we joined here. They grabbed him on a 1-year,
I didn't
$15
catch
million
that.
dollar deal. Yeah, Tariq Woolen is
On
an
a
Eagle
1 year
now.
deal.
Yeah, 15 million. Yeah. So,
Wow.
but you're
Okay.
right. Yeah. It's certainly outside of, you mentioned Taylor. I'm trying to think, we talked about D Alford to the Bills. The Jets
Jalen
picked up
Watson.
Jalen Watson, the Packers, St. Just, or St. Just. The Jets picked up a depth guy. Maybe he challenges in right from the Bears. But yeah, I think it's telling you, how that's going to play out, and I don't disagree with it. I'm not, unless you're looking at a Darrell Revis. I'm not the biggest fan of taking these guys and paying them. I'd rather get a good guy on day 2, run them into the ground, then trade them and do it again.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the AAV of some of these deals that were coming in, like I said, Alontae Taylor was the best. Jalen Watson, 17. That's not bad. But then from there, it's like Cordell Flott, 15 a year. Jamel Deal, 12. Dean, 12. Eric Stokes, 10. Josh Joby, 8. Amika Robertson, 8. D. Alfred, 5.2. Greg Newsom, 10. Like, it's just not big deals. It just tells me that the NFL does not have a lot of confidence in this particular, cornerback free agent class. And I think this is a relatively deep draft class at the cornerback position as well. I think there are guys deep into day 3 that at least interest me. Guys like, round 4 targets like Ephesian Prysox, his teammate Takario Davis,
Yep.
Julian Neal, who's a round 3, round 4 prospect. There's a glut of cornerbacks in that end of day 2, start of day 3 uh, range that I think people are really going to want to get their hands on and try and fill out their teams in a way that they really weren't able to do in this free agency class.
I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah, I love the names you brought up. The Washington guys. Even Prysock. I think he'll be a day 3 pick. Later on, he's a little stiff. I'm really, you mentioned Neil, the Oregon kid. I like him. What's his name? Kennedy. Um,
Oh yeah, yeah,
yeah. Charles Demings is another name that'll be around there
yes, yes.
probably. So you're absolutely right. It's not just about Delane and McCoy and Hood and Avion Terrell and, Chris Johnson, who I absolutely, really like. Yeah, it's a very deep class. So I agree. Why spend it? Go get it cheap. You got your guys, you groom them on special teams, you got them under control, dirt cheap for the next 4 years. And if you hit it out of the park, cool. And if not, I mean, you took a shot on a fourth or fifth round.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just for folks not familiar with the name, because I have the graphic handy, Charles Demings just absolutely blew up the combine, came out with a 997 RAS after jumping 42 inches high, 11 feet broad. And then following that up with a 441 in the 40, that showed us a 153 split, which is very nice numbers, which is why he got the 997. Definitely an interesting day three prospect to watch. Speaking of prospects to watch, which prospects do you think got a draft boost just because of what happened in free agency? We talked about Jeremiah Love already potentially being a lock to go in the top 5 to 7. Can you think of anybody else?
Great question. Certainly from a positional side of things, and maybe a name will creep up, but I think there was a chance that some of the receivers were going to get pushed down, but it was a pretty thin free agent class. So I think overall, outside of the medical concerns again with Tyson, I think we're going to see a bunch of guys go in the first round. I really do. I think so. Who do we got? In any order you want to put them, Tate and Lemon and Tyson, Concepcion, Cooper, Boston. I could see 6 or 7 going in the first round. So I think overall there, I still think, despite the contracts like, Carolina paid out with Phillips or Washington with Odafe Owe. I think pass rushers. Oh, and how can you forget about the Max Crosby trade? I think there's going to be guys that are going to go, a little higher than we think. I think it's going to be top heavy, right? You'll have your Bain, your Bailey, wherever you want to put Reese. I don't know why everybody kind of shits on Keldrick Falk. I still think he's probably in that middle of the first round territory. I wouldn't be surprised if Dallas pulls the trigger there. That wouldn't shock me. But I think it turned out pretty good for the pass rushing class. And then we talk about the tackles. I mean, you always need tackles, right? Offensive tackles. You always do. And, I mean, I saw it happen with Armand Membu last year. The casuals, the ones who don't really pay as much attention as other fans, as other, people within this segment. All of a sudden it was like, poof, there he is. And he's, rocketing up the charts. And turned out to be, he's been a great pick for the Jets, just based on his rookie season. But, Monroe Freeling, we've been talking about him, but now he's becoming a household name, right? More people are learning since certainly the combine or on some of the others, Miller, I am not sure. I'm still in the camp that I don't think Caden Proctor is a first rounder, and I definitely want him at guard. But regardless, I think we're going to see a lot of activity on the tackle thing. I didn't expect Taylor Decker to get cut from Detroit,
Yeah.
to ask for his. I thought they would go maybe a Messidor or something like that. Now I'm like, okay, who's going to be available here at 17? Because they've got to address that. What do you think?
Well, I think in terms of position and stock watch and that sort of thing, for me, wide receivers kind of is an interesting position in this class. And I don't know how you feel about it, but the wide receiver position in this draft class, it reminds me of the 2020 draft class. And that's because the 2020 draft class, we had a lot of talent in that draft class. That was the draft class. We saw Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Jalen Rager, Brandon Ayuk. 6 wide receivers go in the first round, and they were incredibly talented. Then we saw 2 more at 33 and 34, T. Higgins, Michael Pittman. So it's basically 8 wide receivers. In the
Don't
first
forget
34
Denzel
picks.
Mims.
Yeah. And but my point is that they were very talented receivers. Nobody there were not a lot of like look, they all had their own questions like all prospects do, but they were a highly talented class. But because of the depth of the class, we didn't see one go top 10. And it was surprising at the time. People thought, like, look, Henry Ruggs had blazing speed, and obviously he had his off field issues. Jerry
Yeah.
Judy, really good possession receiver, still productive in the league. CD Lamb, the best of the first three that went, but followed up by Justin Jefferson, who went right after Jalen Rager at 22. So it's like the depth of the class made it so that you didn't feel the pressure. When you saw teams turn around, again, like the Bengals, like the Colts, who were able to turn around at the very top of the second round and grab their receiver then. Um, so I wonder if teams might approach this that way as well. And as a result, the top wide receiver prospects. Look, I think Lemon already did a little bit of damage to his stock at the combine. There was a lot of noise coming out, and not a lot of it was super positive. I think you got Jordan Tyson, who medicals are an issue, but I've heard everybody that gets in a room with that kid comes out raving about him. Okay. And he has
Yep.
amazing physical skills. And then Carnell Tate, who is you know, just he's never been a number one, right? He just hasn't. He's always been a number two, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Makes a great bridesmaid. We don't know if he's going to make a great number one. So I just think that maybe that class moves on down a little bit in this overall board. But as far as like an individual prospect that was hurt by this free agent movement, I'm not sure if I can come up with one that was specifically hurt by it.
Yeah. Um, I'm still trying to think, but I love how the way you phrased it about Cardinal Tate, because I am an Ohio State fan, and you're absolutely right. He had, he benefited. I don't want to take away anything away from, what Cardinal Tate can do. I mean, Ohio State has been a wide receiver factory for the last few years.
Right.
When you have one of the best ever, what we've seen in college anyway, in JJ. Yeah, but is it, and I want your take on this. We'll see what happens with Jordan Tyson. And, I don't like projecting, but doesn't this feel like a draft of wide receiver twos rather than wide receiver ones? I feel
Yeah.
we've got the twos, the threes, maybe even the fours. Then you got your returner guys later on, Barian Brown and Colin Lacey and Kevin Coleman Jr., these later day three guys. Yeah, it just doesn't feel like a wide receiver one class, but they're still going to go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see how these guys work out. I do like Jordan Tyson, man. If he can stay healthy, if you told
Ooh,
me Jordan Tyson, I have a genie here, and this genie is going to make sure that Jordan Tyson is in one piece for the next 10 years, dude, give me that guy top five. That guy's amazing. Okay. Like his
yep.
athletic ability, his body control, that I just, man, that I talk about it all the time. But the play against Texas State, that Sam Levitt made the jump throw, and then Jordan Tyson goes up and gets it, and he makes an amazing catch. But that's not enough because he catches it, lands on his feet, turns around, vaults a defensive player, and then dives into the end zone. Meanwhile, the most athletic thing I've done in the past 5 minutes is pick my jaw up off the floor because I just can't fucking believe what I just saw. He, he is an amazing, amazing player. And, he's a guy that, despite missing 48% of his college games or whatever the ridiculous number
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
you almost want to take a risk on just because he really is that good.
I will tell you, I don't know if it happens because I'm not sure what the Raiders now are going to do with the 14th pick. I think they'll probably go receiver. With the Linderbaum signing, I thought maybe you want to help Mendoza go and get Ioane. At 14 with the Ravens pick, I do think they'll go receiver. And I talked about the Jets before with the interior O line with the same guy. I'm telling you, man, if Jordan Tyson somehow drops to 16, I don't care the risk. I'm running the card up because
Okay.
that's just incredible value there for what I think, his ceiling can be. Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's just a ridiculous talent. And I was talking about the 2020 draft a minute ago, and I just wanted to flash back to Miami. This is for the sake
Oh
of us
man.
New England and you New York fans, because we're all going to remember how it started and how it's going. Okay, Tank for Tua was a thing. Now Tua is no mo. Look, we're past the hour mark, and we want to respect your time and the time of our listeners. So we're going to get right into the rapid fire section. We're going to do a real quick answer, one word, one sentence max for sure. Um, we kind of touched on this off the top of the hour, but I want to see how much it's changed since we've started talking and really started processing some of this stuff. Your biggest surprise signing?
Yeah. So in retrospect, again, I don't think it was the location, but the number. So I'll go with you with Linderbaum as number one. And then I'm still surprised by some of these edge deals, Phillips and, oh, actually, I'll give you another one real quick. I thought it was interesting that the Panthers went and gave Kenny Pickett $7 million. I mean, they still got, unless maybe Andy Dalton's going to retire. I mean, he's like 5.5 million of dead money. So I thought that was what's going on here kind of move.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, that's not the administration that drafted Bryce Young, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Right.
So look, I would want a backup plan. Okay. I've never been a big Bryce Young fan. I just think if you can like go get the life-size jersey of your starting quarterback at Build a Bear, it's not a good plan in the NFL. Okay.
Yep.
Um, he's the size of a third grader. I have several kids bigger than he is, and it's just not a good plan in the NFL. Okay, so I was never a big believer in him. Getting a solid backup plan makes sense to me. Um, Now, team whose draft changed the most, and let's disqualify the Rams because they traded a pick, and that's cheating.
Yeah. Yep. I agree with you. I got to go back. We talked about it at the top of the show and my New York Jets, because I really expected three of the four, picks they've got between day one and day two to be defense. And I think now I'm in a position where I'm pretty confident, loosely confident, walking on eggshells, that only maybe one of the four will now be defense.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say, look, it's almost cheating because the Raiders did trade for a pick, but I'm not including that necessarily. It's not built around that as a reason, okay? But the Raiders went ahead and bought a defense, and now they
Yeah.
clearly are going to focus entirely on the offensive side of the ball in the draft, in my opinion, anyway. Look, they still need some cornerback help, and I think they could very well grab a cornerback or maybe even two in this draft. But I think that they need to heavily focus on the offensive side of the ball and build around, what's going to be Tyler Linderbaum and Fernando
Mendoza,
Mendoza.
the
Yes,
quarterback.
yes.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I
Yep.
was coming out with Mendez, and I was like, I know that's not right.
That's okay. I called him. I was tweeting something a few weeks ago. I called him Francisco Mendoza, and I got raked over the
Okay.
coals for that. Yeah. I'm like, I was thinking of Mawanoa. So,
Oh
that's fine.
God, listen. The only thing that goes through my mind every time I hear Fernando Mendoza or I see him or whatever is another time I was watching a podcast and they were talking about his post game interviews. And the guy goes, it's like watching football on the spectrum because nobody's ever introduced Fernando Mendoza to like punctuation when he's speaking. So it's just like this
Oh,
long run on, happy, excited sentence about how much he loves his coach and his teammates and everything going on around him. And it's really just so great. And Coach Signetti has just really put me in a great position here. And I think Indiana's one of a really great school to go to. And look, I really respect Miami as an opponent, but this was a really, really great game. And it's just like,
that
I
was
just
really
can't
well
stop
done.
thinking,
All right. We're going to give you a hand there. That was great. Great job. That's funny.
um, all right. So teams that still, a team that still scares you right now, a team that you're worried about their future.
Uh, Great question, man. And this was supposed to be rapid fire, and I got to think about this. I guess, look, you never count them out because they've got a bunch of rings over the last few years. Man, did the Chiefs need a lot of work on that roster, though. You know, I kind of have a feeling that Mahomes will be fine for the start of the year, and lucky for him, they did dig deep into the pocket, and they brought back Kelsey. So I'm sure he and Taylor celebrated because they'll be afford to eat. They'll be able to afford to eat in 2026 because I'm sure money was
Right.
very tight. But I mean, yeah, they re-up Thornton, but my lord, I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, but I said this on my Twitter space. Ladies, if you're entertaining ever the advances of a man and the first initial of his first name is R and his last name is Rice, whether it's Ray or Rashi, run the other way.
Right.
I I mean, it's not
Yeah,
exactly a
that's too
good
funny.
company to be in, right?
That's
So
too funny. Yeah.
your last name isn't Randy Rice, is it? Okay,
It
good.
is not. No. Nope.
Um, but I mean the receiver issues. Who do they have at corner? They got no secondary.
Yeah.
What's going on with they're letting go of Jawan Taylor. You got to fill that spot on the right side of the line. I mentioned receiver. Okay, they brought in Walker, great, but yeah, that's I think they got a lot of work to do, and I think it may
Yeah.
be a little hard for them to get it all done in one off season.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. And there's going to be, look, there's still a little bit of speculation as to whether or not Mahomes will be ready at the beginning of the year. Their backup quarterback is now in Arizona. So I think there's questions there too. And then when Mahomes does come back, I mean, it's immediately all right on his back. He's got to carry that thing on his own again. With Travis Kelsey, as you mentioned, which you mentioned Travis and Taylor. I remember somebody, Travis saying like, "Oh, him and Taylor have never fought as a couple." And someone said, "Well, yeah, if me and my girlfriend's combined net worth was 2.1 billion and my part was point 0.1, we'd never fight either."
Right, exactly, 100%,
listen,
hundred
listen, they
percent.
say money doesn't buy happiness, but I think that's just a rumor that rich people started. Um, So, if you had to pick one player that's most likely to rise after free agency, who do you think
From the
in
draft.
the draft? Yes.
Yeah. Uh Pull up my board, but the name that we just spoke about him, you were ahead of the curve on Monroe Freeling, and I think the rest of
Mhm.
us are now catching up to it. You know, yeah, I think that's I said it before, a lock for picks. So I think his stock, based on the position, based on where he plays on the line, I think he's probably just really you know uh, raised his profile to be in that top six. Um, and I'll give you another one. It's not an unknown name. I don't consider him a tight end. He's my tight end one, but he's not a tight end. But I do think he's just an overall really good weapon. Put Kenyon Sadiq in man coverage and watch the man eat. But now, isn't that an interesting potential for a team like the Rams now? In that early, slot. I forget. I think they're at 13 with Atlanta's pick. But
Yeah.
I think, we have seen pretty much nothing so far in the legal tampering occur with the tight end market, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I was wrong. I thought David Njoku would be one of the first ones to have a
Mm.
deal. I thought, Howie Roseman's going to be there with, invisible ink, but he'll be at his house signing. But we've seen really nothing going on with the tight end market. But I do think that it's not going to hurt Sadiq because, again, I don't really see him as a prototypical tight end. But I just think there's going to be a couple of teams that are just going to say, you know what? F it. This guy is a weapon, and we're taking him right here.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely an interesting point too. Maybe it applies to the entire tight end class. I mean, we saw Eli Stowers, jump out of the building in Indianapolis. He might still be in the air right now. Um, and there are a number of other promising prospects at that position. Sam Roush comes to mind. A couple guys
I really
down the
like
board
Michael
there that
Trigg.
you could see having an NFL future.
Yeah, I
Yes,
like
yes,
Michael
him and his
Trigg.
giant hands.
I like Dalen Bentley. Who'll be a little later on. I mean, look, they're not
Mm,
Harold Fannin or Brock Bowers or but these guys are going to be able to contribute. That's actually something we didn't talk about was like Charlie Kohler getting a good deal going out
yeah.
to the Chargers. I mean, that was a big deal for essentially a guy who's tight end three. He was a blocker, but yeah, I do think
Yeah.
it'll help Sadiq a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, somebody's going to tell the Chargers they need to get some offensive linemen on the interior to block. It's great to get a tight end, but Justin Herbert's career is going to go a lot longer if you go
I
ahead and you
mean,
find yourself an actual interior offensive lineman. Like,
assuming like Ioane is gone, don't you think that's like the spot for either Pregnon or Basantis or something? Unless they make a
yeah.
trade or yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that would make a lot of sense. Ioane, that's absolutely his floor. Like, I can't imagine he gets to 22. Um, but if he does, that's got to be his floor.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen, that's going to do it for the episode today. Thank you so much for making the time to be here, Steve. We really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. Make sure to get on over to Steve's Twitter. That's Steve underscore NFL. Give him a follow there. Give him a sub over on YouTube. He does a lot of good stuff. You're not going to want to miss it. Um, Anything to add?
No, again, this was awesome. I didn't even realize that we're, an hour in. It was just flying
Yeah.
by, but a lot of great conversation. I mean, love chatting it up with you. You know your stuff inside and out. And yeah, however, whether you got to Randy because of me, also make sure, whoop, it's going to be on his thing, not mine. There we go. Make sure you're following Randy, you're subscribing, tune in. Dude just knows his stuff, and he's funny as shit too. So make sure you're doing it.
I appreciate that, Steve. All right. Thanks, everybody, for watching.